Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. This weekend, London witnessed two vast and deeply contrasting demonstrations that underscored the political and cultural tensions reshaping Britain. One rally, led by anti-immigration activist Tommy Robinson, focused on border control, crime, and national identity. The other, a massive pro-Palestinian march marking Nakba Day, called for stronger action against Israel over the war in Gaza. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack what these protests reveal about Britain's increasingly polarized politics is Bartosz Kielak, correspondent and the Times contributor. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hey, Benjamin.
So looking at these rallies, starting with Tommy Robinson's rally, it did drew plenty of people. Now, to what extent does this reflect support for Robinson personally? And to what extent is it simply channeling broader public frustration over things like immigration, crime, and social cohesion?
Well, in effect, this Tommy Robinson rally didn't draw nearly as many supporters as he hoped it would. Last September, it was 150,000 people. The newest estimates by London police placed attendance at yesterday's rally at about 60,000 people. So very, very few compared to what he claimed on stage. He said there's millions of people in attendance. At the same time, there was a second rally happening in the city. It was the pro-Palestine rally, which also claimed to attract, 250,000 people in attendance, although the latest estimates from police that I saw on the Sky News website places it at around 20,000 people. So both of marches, somewhat low attendance, but still very considerable danger to public safety, which led to a deployment of 4,000 police officers, the biggest such police mobilization in recent years.
Right, like you mentioned, there's also a protest going on, a pro-Palestinian one. Now, these marches have become a regular feature of British public life since the outbreak of the Gaza war. What explained their sustained scale and continued presence?
I reckon that Tommy Robinson is just trying to carve up a political career for himself. Whether he's going to be successful in that effort is highly doubtful. You know, he's a convict, and most people here in the UK very much know that. He's been receiving support from people like Elon Musk on social media, and you know, he could capitalize on that, creating some sort of a public career for himself abroad. Whereas here in the UK, he's commonly regarded as what he technically is, a criminal. Whereas when it comes to pro-Palestine marches, you know, the public opinion is very divided on the subject of Israel. Over 50% of people in the country do not support Israel's efforts in Gaza. Still, if you look at the Eurovision Song Contest, Israel received quite a few votes from the UK as well. So as I said, very much split. The UK government has been trying to avoid this topic. It did not, which is a very important thing to stress, it did not enter Israel and the US war on Iran, which led to much criticism on behalf of Donald Trump, directed at Keir Starmer. In basically, if you think about it, the Palestine issue is not going anywhere anytime soon, and whoever is going to ascend to leadership, as we're looking at the leadership contest, and probably a new prime minister this year, is going to have to deal with that issue too.
All right, speaking of Keir Starmer, he doesn't seem to be doing that well in British politics at the moment, especially looking at the recent local election. They did take a shellacking. What happened there, and does it have anything to do with the rise of, Nigel Farage's Reform UK movement?
Reform is a very serious political contender. Nigel Farage has, you know, he travelled a long road as a politician, and he stands to win the next election if we were to trust the polling now. There's issues with Reform Party. You know, it attracted quite a few significant figures from the Conservative Party, people with career ambitions of their own, and we know very well about parties focus around a singular leader, that they do not take such competition very well. At the same time, we saw large gains made by the Green Party. It's surging in the polls. It attracted a lot of people who formerly supported Jeremy Corbyn, and of course, as I said, we are looking at a leadership election within the Labour Party this year. They are very much hoping to revitalize the party with the new leader. A Conservative Party is not doing very well at the moment, despite the fact that they've ruled the country for 14 years. Kami Badenoch has somewhat managed to stabilize the party, and the very much could be said. The same thing could be said about Keir Starmer. You know, his first task taking on as prime minister was to stabilize the ship. I think the issue that most people take with Keir Starmer is that ship hasn't really embraced on any significant course, and the new leader will have that task ahead of him.
Right. So, do you think that the rise in parties like Greens, like Reform, has more to do with the increase of anti-establishment kind of sentiment? Is it a protest vote against this pre-established party, or do you think that they have any ideas or policies that people are latching onto?
In a sense, you know, the UK has been a very polarized country, especially over the past 10 years. You know, the Brexit vote was what, a 52-48 split, as we very well know. And people who support Europe, who support returning to a closer economic or any other sort of relationship with Europe, they kind of support the Labour Party. Previously, they support the Green Party. And even today, we saw West Streeting, up until last week, the Health Secretary, and now one of the leadership hopefuls, saying that he will very much support going back into the EU. It's a bit of a political ploy. His direct competitor, Andy Burnham, who's the mayor of Manchester, who will be running in a by-election soon, is running in a very conservative, reform-leaning area. And if he chooses to follow West Streeting into embracing a closer relationship with Europe, that will mean that he might actually lose some voters in that area, losing that prospect of winning the by-election. Whereas if he chooses to play towards the voters that he needs to win first, then that makes his chances, Andy Burnham's chances, of winning the leadership election within the Labour Party, which is heavily pro-EU leaning, much more difficult in the future.
So is the EU topic where most of the polarization is coming from, or are there any other issue that is driving these kind of issues within the social cohesion?
I think if you look at the latest economic history of the UK, it's been a constant series of embarrassment. The last year on record, when the UK people were really proud of being, the country that they are, was 2012, the Olympics. That's the year that they remember most fondly. Ever since, it's really been on a downward trajectory. Important matter at hand was the austerity policy that the Conservative government has implemented that froze wages, and there has been very little wage growth since 2010. Second, Brexit obviously cut the GDP of the country significantly. The growth of the country has also been damaged by the COVID pandemic, and war in Ukraine didn't help. It's faring pretty well so far this year, but what we observed in recent years was that the first quarter of the year, the country's been growing, and later that really slowed down. So it's too early this year to make any estimations about the prospects of the country faring better economically. Still, that doom and gloom and those repeated upheavals have kind of impacted of how British people see themselves and how they see British politics, but they see British politics as very ineffective, and they blame the two main parties for that. And on one hand, Nigel Farage attracting former Conservative politicians, that's not really going to help that image. So people very well know that if he's running with former Conservative ministers to rule the country again, that they're going to get more of the same. Whereas if you look at the Green Party, they attracted a lot of people from the Labour Party that were unceremoniously thrown out after Jeremy Corbyn's time as a leader, that not only attracts accusations of anti-Semitism, that also kind of makes it more of the same. Still, the UK is a country that has a first-past-the-post system. The person locally who wins the most votes gets into parliament, and that kind of promotes there being very few parties in parliament. So even though we're looking at slightly more divided political landscape, with some likelihood that whoever wins the next election will have to enter coalition agreement, unless it's a reform landslide. I don't think that main parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party, aren't going anywhere.
All right. Now, circling back to those protests that's centered around immigration across Europe, immigration has once again become one of the most political explosive issues. How central is this issue within the UK politics?
Less so than it's been 5 years ago, Boris Johnson's no longer a figure in politics, although you can never really fully discard the prospect of Boris Johnson coming back. Brexit hasn't really been resurfacing as a story. We see that really odd, as the Cultural Secretary Lisa Nandy described it today on the BBC, a really odd effort on behalf of West Streeting to put EU at the forefront of his potential leadership campaign. This government, the Labour government, has been slowly but steadily reapproaching Europe. It's signed treaties with France. It's signed a treaty with Poland. It is to sign a treaty with Poland, with the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk traveling to London, I think, this month to sign that treaty. It has not decided on whether to pursue, an economic union with Europe or even entering back as a full-fledged member. The thing is, the moment when any major party embraces that course as the chosen destination of the country, the old demons of Brexit will very much be reawaken. And as long as Nigel Farage is a significant figure in the British politics, a person who's made their entire career on campaigning on Brexit, we can very much anticipate that it will become the sort of an issue that drove this country into madness the past 10 years.
All right, last but not least, really quick, was recently we heard a name popping up, the former Reform UK MP named Rupert Lowe recently launched a new political movement, Restore Britain, which is even farther to the right of Nigel Farage's Reform, also very much emphasizing on anti-immigration or even remigration policies. Do you think that he would become a force to be reckoned with, or perhaps it's still too early to tell, or maybe he's a little bit too niche to really come into mainstream politics?
That's a difficult one. He's made gains in Essex. Essex is just one county. You cannot discard the anti-migration sentiment in the country as one of the major forces in the British politics. The UK, because of that, is renegotiating with Europe, with several other European states, and that's something that Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, mentioned to me in conversation last year, that he's approaching Denmark, he's approaching the UK, trying to negotiate the Human Rights Charter. And there's very, very few politicians who are brave enough and honest enough to say that this country needs migration. And maybe I'll be dishonest not to say that me, myself, being a migrant living in London, I've benefited from the fact that this country has historically been open to receiving people from Europe. The biggest story is that ever since they've closed the doors on free movement of people from Europe, they kept on receiving a lot of people from other parts of the world. I think I saw a recent story saying that the UK has this year or last year received far fewer people than they previously did, and that's something that Labour will seek to campaign on. Still, as I said, there's seasonal jobs, there's hospitality jobs, there's low-paid workers, the low-wage jobs that not everyone wants to work, and if they do, there's not enough people to work in those positions. So migration is still very much needed. And if the country chooses to embrace a slightly different course, where they will be only seeking highly skilled migrants coming over from overseas, they will not be able to fill those positions. So, they very much imprisoned by the political narrative imposed on them, unable to be honest about what the country really needs. Economists seem to agree that migration is needed and beneficial to the country.
All right, so we'll have to see how that develops. And in the meantime, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on TVP World.
Thanks.
Cheers. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, and commentary, please Please stay tuned to TVP World.